Hi summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. And for today we are going to take a look at the best and strongest picks for the lower elo bracket. So let's just start straight away, after you hit the sub button of course. The number one champion on this list is Malphite. Malphite is quite an underrated pick, overall into heavy AD drafts. He can really clap you in the lane if you disrespect him in melee range. For this, all he has to do is pop his second ability after an auto attack because it's an auto attack reset. Then combining this with a third ability, he has an attack speed slow, which means if you try to extended trade him, you're just going to lose. And the worst thing about this, he can just throw his cheesy wheel at your face, so his first ability, chase you down or run away, whatever suits the situation the best. But what makes this champion so unbelievably good in the lower elo brackets? Number one, he's super easy to pilot. There's not much you can do wrong apart from missing your ultimate, and if you technically autocast everything you have, it becomes quite impossible unless you're facing enemies who are quite mechanically capable. But now let's talk about his laning phase a little bit, and what he can do from the level 1 to the level 3. On level 1, depending on what champion he's facing, he can use his first ability to poke the enemy. This is especially easy when he's facing somebody who wants to run at him, like for example a Darius. Malphite can always run away unless he mispositions. And against other champions, like for example in early game Renekton, Malphite can even skill his second ability first. And afterwards he can auto-attack reset on it and clap the Renekton early game. And it's quite easy to do so, especially with the attack speed slow. Because contrary to the PC version of the game, the empowered Renekton's second ability doesn't remove shields instantly. It still just deals damage to them, so if your passive shield is up, you have quite the advantage. And when the game goes into the later stages, you can pull a magic trick on the enemy team. If you buy a proto belt, you can just bait the enemy into thinking that you're using your ultimate ability, because the proto belt is propelling you forward. But in fact, it is just a proto belt, which means you have an easy hit after using the proto belt, because your enemy is most likely going to use a summoner or his movement spell to avoid their supposed ultimate. And after that, all you have to do is open alt chat and leave a question mark. This will most likely tilt the enemy into the oblivion and grant you some free LP. And now from the free LP, let's move on to our question of the day and a small break for it. What's your feedback on the Veigar event? Let me know in the comments below. And from this, we straight up move to the Rammus. Rammus is rather similar to the Malphite in the sense that champions who build any kind of AD items or are AD carries hate this champion. The reason is quite simple. Combining Aftershock with the second ability, he gains armor values that are just out of this world. And since armor grants Rammus damage, his damage is absolutely nuts in those situations. So unless the enemy team has an AD carry who is designed to shred tanks like for example a Vayne, it gets really hard to kill the Rammus, because he's so unbelievably tanky. And on top of being so tanky, he's super easy to pilot. In the jungle role, he can easily just clear 2 camps and roll around the map however he pleases. Don't forget, jungle is still an unbalanced and broken role that goes in basically both ways, in a good and a bad way, and it still needs to be fixed, hopefully soon. The recent changes are kind of okay, but it still doesn't deal with the issues of the amount of kill XP you get and the amount of lane XP and so on. But one of the good things about Rammus is as well that ganking with him, even if the enemy team has vision, is something that is easy to accomplish. He's tanky enough to ignore turrets, and he has a gap closer and a movement speed start on his first ability. And don't even forget to mention his passive movement speed on top. So if you hit the later stages of the game, with for example a Ghost Summoner spell or a Righteous Glory or anything along those lines, combining this with your passive, your first ability and your ultimate, you're Sonic the Hedgehog. You're unbelievably fast and nothing can really stop you because you're too fast. It's a mobile game. People don't have like 1 millisecond reaction times. And even if they did, what are they gonna do? Flash away from you? You're just going to go after them anyway, and then they'll be taunted and die from your team, or they kill themselves because you deal so much damage. Another champion that also deals tons of damage is Galio. Galio is also easy to pilot and execute in the game, so don't shy away from playing this champion. He is quite good, especially if you buy Rod of Ages into Rabadon's Death Cap. With those 2 items, you will crush your opposition. Galio's base damage is already quite high, but combining these 2 items makes you one-shot people. But what is so good and easy about Galio? Galio can easily push the wave with his first ability. And another thing on top, he's very sturdy because he has access to the Aftershock Keystone, or if he really wants to, even the Electrocute one with an Igniting combination. But the real deal breaker is the fact that Galio has an easy time joining his teammates from across the map with his ultimate ability at any point of the game, which is something that, especially if you consider that if you go down the ladder, a lot of random fights and skirmishes are bound to happen, and Galio will have the opportunity to just join his team in those situations. So whenever somebody is slacking or snoozing off on the job, Galio can take the initiative and get there first. And being there first will inflict mental anguish on the enemy team, because then they're going to call things like mid-div or whatever div, because they don't understand what has happened to them and why it did. There's also some nice trick about the Galio that if you angle your dash towards your own tower, basically away from the enemy, you're going to knock up the enemy faster, because whenever Galio uses his third ability, he jumps back a little bit before he dashes towards the designated area. So if you want to give the enemy less room for flashing or outplaying you, you can always use this trick to gain an advantage in a skirmish. It really can make the difference, especially if you look at the higher levels of play at the later point in time. And for those who aren't familiar with Galio, if you ever watched the PC version of this game, you're probably used to Galio having a keystone called Predator. With that, he gains an active enchantment for the boots to grant him even more movement speed, and then you just permanently rotate to other lanes, sacrificing farm to get people killed. And because he's so sturdy and tanky overall, and has the ability to engage you, it worked too many times and felt really frustrating to play against. So the real question here is, when are we going to see Predator in the form it is on the PC version in Wild Rift? But something nobody but the Nunu mains are happy about is Nunu as a champion. And with that, we go over to our next champion, Willem and Nunu. Nunu is the pain of every laner next to Lee Sin. He can just do a camp and roll at you, and there's little you can do about it outside of having deep vision, which is already a problem if you think about how early game works usually. You only have very limited time to set up vision early game, because if you wait too long, you might get punished in the form of agency in lane, losing minion XP, and other things. And with the way Nunu works, he can just roll at you from a kilometer's distance and still catch up with you because of his snowball ability. And since Nunu is a tank champion, he doesn't need a good economic foothold. All he needs is one item and tankiness, because then he picks one lane and terrorizes this specific lane over and over again, up until you probably rage quit. Which is a thing that we need to talk about for a brief moment. Tank champions usually need less gold to be fully functional. They normally have one specific purpose in a teamfight, and they can accomplish this with just one item and an enchantment. For example, take Wukong in the top lane. Wukong can just have a Black Cleaver and a Gargoyle enchant and wreak havoc in a teamfight. He can go in, pop the enchantment, pop the clone on the ultimate and apply the Black Cleaver stacks. He'll be unbelievably tanky and he'll reduce the enemy's armor, which means he's soaking damage, he's CCing, and he's amplifying the damage of your teammates, all at once. That is quite crazy, right? And all of that with just a minimal investment. Compared to an AD carry with one item, that's quite a nice thing he can do. But now let's go back to Nunu. Another thing about Nunu is that you can never steal an objective from him. His consume and smite combo is unbeatable, unless of course he griefs it. It's like in the past playing against an Evelynn. And Evelynn had the ability, if she was fat enough, to kill Nashor from 3 HP to 0. There was nothing you can do about it. And people still wanted to do objectives against them, which is basically griefing. So if you're playing against the Nunu and the Nunu is alive and you know he has flash, please don't do objectives. It is too risky because all he has to do is flash over, Q smite, and it's gone. Especially with Nashor and Elder, this can be really heartbreaking. So please keep paying attention to those things. And going from a literal snowballing champion to another champion that likes to snowball in the Baron lane, we go over to Renekton. Renekton is a nice blind pick if you're not sure what to pick in the Baron lane. He can always function in any scenario going either damage or tank. He'll at least always provide value. He is like the jack of all trades who isn't the best, but he's still decent. So you can put him in the weak side and you can put him on the strong side, which is quite a nice thing. And all you have to do for this is one item decision. If you want to carry on the sideline with a Renekton, just go Blade of the Rune King. Your third ability in the empowered form applies a damage 3 times. So with the auto attack cancel anti-ability in sequence, you have 4 procs of the Blade of the Rune King, which is a lot of damage if you're a melee champion. So you will see it happen more than once that Renekton just 100-0 dives the opposition, and there's nothing they can do about it if the Renekton is too strong. And otherwise, if you're playing for a more teamfight oriented version, having the Black Cleaver and the additional tankiness among a Gargoyle enchant will be enough to keep you alive for a long time and annoy the enemy team at the same time. But keep in mind, if the Renekton builds Blade of the Rune King and he's going into a teamfight, he'll get instantly killed. Always check the items before a fight happens and then determine what you want to do, at least if you have the time to do so. And in lane, especially if you're playing the Renekton, pay attention to your Fury bar. Once it's close to being red, look for an engage. The enemy is not going to connect the dots mentally that you have the Fury you need to do an all-in, and they'll just be a little bit slacking in terms of positioning. Especially in the lower elo brackets, this is something that happens all the time, so be ready to punish this. And if you want to do some small trading or fast trading, all you have to do is dash in, auto attack, animation cancel your second ability, use your first spell and dash out again. Then you repeat the same process when the cooldowns come up again. And that concludes today's video. Thank you all for watching, hit the like and subscribe button and see you tomorrow for another ProGuides Wild Rift video.